Hello and welcome back to the Ordinary Mystic Podcast. This is episode number 3, and this episode is called Breaking the Tablets. This is an idea that has been close to my heart for some time now. I first heard this line or this idea from Richard Rohr in his book Falling Upward, which has continued to be one of the most seminal books I've ever read. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend you do so. It's about the second half of life, and not from an age perspective, but from you can call it spirituality perspective, or how we approach those two halves of life. But what I want to kind of start with is this picture, or this idea that there are these moments when the ground beneath us starts to tremble. And it doesn't necessarily happen violently. At least that's not how it happened for me. So it was a slow shift. I remember coming home at 21 from being overseas. I was working with a group called YWAM in Brisbane, Australia. And I remember coming back, and I'd been gone for 6 months. And while that's not an extraordinary large amount of time, and everybody that I came back to was living the same life, but I was not. And I thought there was something I just couldn't put my foot or my finger on what was happening. And so I tried to ignore it at first. I tried to keep it all together. I tried to just kind of jump back in full swing. You know, I was on Young Life staff. I was coaching baseball at the high school I had graduated from. So I'd always kind of been in this safe bubble. And so I'd gone overseas and seen things and been a part of things that really opened up my worldview. You know, it had broken my box of God, but also just broken my box of there's this whole world out there with different cultures and different people who live vastly different lives than we do, from a day-to-day perspective, a belief perspective, what they're giving their energies to. And so it just broke me out of that bubble. And so I realized now it was really hard to just come back to that bubble, not because anything was wrong with it, but just because I was starting to become a different person. And that is what this episode, I hope, or what I want it to be about, kind of the unraveling, the breaking, and why it might actually be holy, because at the time it didn't feel that way, right? At the time it felt like my whole world was falling apart. I remember thinking that the stuff that I had learned in church, the way that Jesus and God was supposed to show up, the things that were supposed to happen if I did A, B, C, you know, I played the script, I did all of those things, and my life was not turning out how I thought or hoped it would, given that kind of plan. And so I started to question this whole thing. And some of you may have come from church world and some of you may have haven't, but there's this idea in kind of the evangelical world where, you know, you give your life to Jesus, you are unsaved, and then you give your life to Jesus and you are saved. And then once you're saved, you're saved. However, they still want you to read your Bible every day, do your quiet time, come to church, be really kind to everybody. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex before you're married, don't curse, you know, give as much as you can until you're exhausted. And I did that for a long, long time, even after kind of coming back from this experience. There's those old scripts, right? There's the pastor or the missionary or the youth worker where you're on all the time. I basically became a role all of the time. I was always on call. I was always in this, wearing this mask, in this role, whatever word you want to call it, of being this missionary, pastor, ministry worker. I don't know what term you'd give for it, but being on this Young Life staff of, I always have to kind of be in a good mood, or I always have to be taking into account that somebody else's spirituality is riding on my attitude, the way I present myself, the answers that I give, the things that I say, the way that I dress. And while I'm incredibly grateful to Young Life and the years that I spent there, because a lot of amazing things happened friendships that I still have to this day, things that I learned. There are also a lot of old scripts that I had to unlearn from that, right? And that's true with anything. You become a husband, you become a father, you become a leader, you become all of these things, and they're roles that you're in, some of them chosen, some of them not, but they're roles that you fill, and sometimes it can feel like you're acting or kind of always on. And there's not really a part of the day, except for the shower or bed, where you kind of just get to take off that mask or that face and be this like full version of yourself. You're doing everything right, but you're feeling like you're disappearing inside. That's what was happening to me. There's this ache that there's something off. I don't know if it's the story I'm being told or the way that I'm living it out, the way that I'm translating it, but it wasn't quite losing my faith, but almost like I was outgrowing that version of God or that version of life that I inherited. I tried to hold on to it. I tried to kind of tape it all back together, but eventually I had to let those tablets fall, right? That idea where Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and gets the original stone tablets, right? The 10 Commandments from God, and then he comes down and he sees the people worshiping golden calves and idols and not really doing what he says. And so he gets mad and he smashes those first set of tablets. And that story, told in the introduction of that book by Richard Rohr, really opened up this kind of illusion of perfection and certainty. But it also slid me into about a decades-long dark night of the soul that really just came out kind of at the beginning of COVID or 2021. And then what started kind of me on this journey was this new unraveling. And not in a bad way, but I would say for about a year now, I've been going down this new road, right, that thanks to a conversation with a good friend, Chris, shout out to Chris Gibson if she's listening. But we were sitting in a house one day having a conversation before I was supposed to go to this play. And she just looked at me and said, we were talking about another person that we admire and some of the work that they do. And she just said to me, you could do that work. There's nothing keeping you from doing that work except that you just seem so exhausted. She said, I like you so much, but you seem so tired and not like yourself. And that has just sent me on this a little over a year long journey on what does it look like to finally start to take care of myself, to put down some of those scripts, to smash some of those tablets, and what does it look like to go back up the mountain, to go inside and focus on me? What are the golden calves? Was it success? There was certainly some of that. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be known. I wanted my work to matter. There was the certainty, right? We all want to be right. We all want to think that the things that we believe are the right things. Nobody really believes the wrong things on purpose or wants to. If you're familiar with Science Mike or Mike McHarg, as he's known, I heard him say one time, I absolutely know there are things that I believe that are incorrect. I just don't know which ones they are. And so kind of just breaking apart that idea of certainty and having to hold certainty so tightly. And then there's approval, which is a huge one for me, and that's tied into image. You know, I used to lie a ton in high school just because I was so unhappy with myself. I did not love myself. I could even go as probably far as say that I hated myself. So I would lie, and so to everybody who went to Smoky Hill High School from 2000 to 2004, I apologize because there's probably some sort of dishonesty that I gave you at that point just because I thought I was so lame that I had to make up stories about things that I did or who I was just to get acceptance. And so there was a huge part of approval tied into that from way back. Just, I remember being made fun of in middle school for wearing sweatpants, just these moments where you're like, oh, I think that's where that kind of crept in of just like, oh man, I would have really loved their approval, or my image was hurt, and so it lost me the friends I thought I wanted. And those things are painful, and you're sitting here at 38 years old, 39 years old, finally realizing that, oh, maybe my tie to approval was because of something that happened in middle school. Or, right, you want to project a certain image, but your core self doesn't project that image, but you see people acting a certain way and getting a certain response, and you want that response too. So there are, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are people in my life who I admired who were doing certain things, acting certain ways, and I really liked the response they were getting. And so I would kind of change or alter my approach to be more like that. So, if you're not the most attractive guy, you try to be the funny guy, right? If the funny guy is taken, you try to be the sweet and sincere guy, or the wise guy, both wise guy like cracking up and wise guy like, oh, he says wise things, or you're the quiet one. You kind of take on this role depending on what needs to be filled. And so I did that, and it was painful to break out of. And so then when I came to this breaking, I thought of it almost like as an end. I was like, is this the end? Is this the end of me believing in God? Is this the end of me having these friendships? Am I going to be all alone in the world as far as friends? Am I going to be in the world alone as far as, God or the cosmos? Like, maybe there's nothing to this. And I've come to realize in the last couple of years that maybe the breaking isn't the end. Maybe it's the actual beginning of something, because the breaking happened, right? The decade came and went, and I struggled, and I asked many questions, and you can talk to my wife sometime about like how, dark it got at times, and how, worried she was about me. Not that I would physically hurt myself or anything like that, but I was just in a bad place mentally, spiritually, emotionally at times. But I'm here, and I'm still breathing, and I still have a faith that's not the faith I inherited, or not that version of it, but the breaking didn't mean that I failed. The unraveling wasn't the end of my faith. It was the beginning of real spirituality. It was the journey into what I think the second half of life is. That second half of life where we finally kind of stop trying to climb the ladder. We stop trying to ascend, and instead we start to descend. I know for me, I spend a lot more time in silence, but I'm absent less. And by that, I mean, there were a lot of times where I was somewhere physically, but I was not there mentally. I was thinking about the next thing, or somewhere else I had to be, or something else that I wanted to put my focus on. So you can be somewhere and be talking and be loud, and at the same time you're not present, or you can be all by yourself and silent and be as present as you possibly can. So in the silence, I find actually the opposite of absence. I find presence. I think the second journey, or the second half of life, is about emptiness, but not emptiness as abandonment, not emptiness as, hey, everybody moved out while you were at work and now you come home to emptiness, but you're emptying yourself of all of the things that no longer work. You're getting rid of all of that mental and spiritual furniture, because it doesn't matter how you can reorder it all you want, it's still in there, right? You kind of hollow things out, and a lot of times when we hear hollowing things out, we think weakness, but what if the hollow places are where the real voice starts to whisper? Once you get silent, once you get empty, once you get hollow in the sense of getting rid of all of those things, for me, that's where clarity has started to show up. And that's where mystics from across traditions see this is not a new concept, right? John of the Cross, during his dark night of the soul, right? We hear about it called the exile, the unknowing, the wilderness. This takes place in a lot of places, the hero's journey. So if you find yourself in that space right now, might be for you. Yeah. If you're trembling, if you're questioning, if you feel like everything around you is starting to unravel, know that you're not broken. You're awakening to something new, right? This unraveling is sacred. Let's reframe it. The unraveling is sacred, right? The dark night isn't a dead end, but it's a passage through. It's your invitation to no longer try and circumvent your pain or your grief. It's an option to go straight through it, because that's the only way we ever get anywhere, is by going straight through it. Maybe the invitation for you is to notice the small gold shining through the cracks. And the beauty is that you can let yourself off the hook, because you don't have to hold it all together. You don't have to make sense of everything. You just have to keep walking. You just have to keep walking. I want to thank you guys so much for being here, for walking this with me. And maybe what's trembling under your feet isn't the end of something. Maybe it's the start of something holy.